One room, one bed, one man seconds away from death. And just before the needle goes in, he speaks. Some cry, some beg, some smile. From "I love you" to "go to hell." These are the last things ever spoken by the world's most dangerous people. Final meals, final words, final moments. This is not just crime. This is the raw edge of human nature when there's nowhere left to run. You're watching Mr. Verdict, and these are the most chilling last words ever spoken before execution. Case 1. J. Kelly Pinkerton. Be strong for me. J. Kelly Pinkerton was 17 years old when he committed 2 murders in Amarillo, Texas. On October 26, 1979, he broke into the home of Sarah Dawn Lawrence, where he assaulted and murdered her. 6 months later, on April 9, 1980, he entered a furniture store and killed Sherry Welch, a 25-year-old former beauty queen. Pinkerton was arrested on September 26, 1980, after forensic evidence linked him to both crimes. He was convicted and sentenced to death for each murder. On May 15, 1986, at the age of 24, Pinkerton was executed by lethal injection at the Walls Unit in Huntsville, Texas. His father, Gene Pinkerton, was the only family member present. Moments before the execution, Pinkerton said to his father, "Be strong for me. I want you to know I'm at peace with myself and with my God." He then recited an Islamic prayer, having converted to Islam during his time on death row. His final words were, "I feel dizziness. I feel dizziness." Pinkerton's demeanor in his final moments was calm, a stark contrast to the violent nature of his crimes. Case 2. Johnny Frank Garrett. The rest of the world can kiss my ever-loving ass. On Halloween night, 1981, a crime shook the city of Amarillo, Texas. Sister Tadia Benz, a 76-year-old nun, was found dead in her convent. Just across the street lived 17-year-old Johnny Frank Garrett, a teenager with a troubled past and a long history of abuse. Within days, Garrett was arrested. Investigators pointed to a signed confession, but critics later claimed it was obtained under intense pressure. The trial moved quickly. Despite his age and documented signs of mental illness, Garrett was convicted and sentenced to death in 1982. For years, his case sparked national debate. Advocates cited inconsistencies in the evidence, questions about DNA, and expert opinions suggesting he suffered from dissociative identity disorder. Even Pope John Paul II pleaded for clemency. Texas granted a temporary reprieve, but ultimately the execution moved forward. On February 11, 1992, Johnny Frank Garrett was executed by lethal injection at the age of 28. Before the drugs took effect, he looked at the witnesses and delivered a final message that stunned the room. "I'd like to thank my family for loving me and taking care of me. The rest of the world can kiss my ever-loving ass." His words, half gratitude, half defiance, became one of the most infamous last statements in American death row history. Decades later, his story still raises difficult questions. Was justice truly served, or was it rushed and possibly wrong? Case 3. Gary Gilmore. Let's do it. In the summer of 1976, Gary Gilmore walked into a gas station in Orem, Utah. Moments later, he shot the clerk, Max Jensen, point blank. The very next day, in a different town, he did it again. This time, the victim was Benny Bushnell, a motel manager in Provo. Both men were cooperative, both had families, both died without warning. Gilmore was caught quickly. He left behind a trail of blood, a pair of stolen shoes, and a witness who didn't flinch. But what set this case apart wasn't just the murders, it was what came after. At trial, Gilmore made a shocking decision. He refused all appeals. He didn't want a delay. He didn't want mercy. He wanted to die, and he wanted it done quickly. The courts tried to slow it down. Activists begged him to fight, but Gilmore didn't budge. His case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and still, he waited, ready. On January 17, 1977, at Utah State Prison, Gary Gilmore faced a firing squad. He wore a white shirt, sat in a wooden chair, and stared straight ahead. When asked for his final words, he smiled slightly and said, "Let's do it." And they did. Gilmore's death marked the return of capital punishment in America after a nearly decade-long halt. His final words would later echo across pop culture and even inspire Nike's slogan, "Just do it." But long before that phrase sold shoes, it belonged to a man who chose death and made sure the world watched. Case 4. Aileen Wuornos. I'll be back. Between 1989 and 1990, Aileen Wuornos, a woman with a tumultuous past, was convicted of murdering 6 men in Florida. She claimed that the killings were acts of self-defense against clients who had assaulted or attempted to assault her during her work as a sex worker. Her case drew national attention, highlighting issues related to gender, violence, and the legal system's treatment of self-defense claims by women. Wuornos was arrested in 1991 and, after a series of trials, received 6 death sentences. She spent over a decade on death row, during which time her mental health was a subject of debate. Despite concerns, she dismissed her legal counsel and ceased all appeals, leading to her execution by lethal injection on October 9, 2002. Her final words were enigmatic. "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the rock and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back." Wuornos' life and crimes have been the subject of various media portrayals, most notably the 2003 film Monster, which earned Charlize Theron an Academy Award for her portrayal of Wuornos. Case 5, Ricky Ray Rector. I'll save the pie for later. In January 1992, Arkansas carried out one of the most controversial executions in American history. The man at the center was Ricky Ray Rector, and his final words would leave the world stunned. Rector had been convicted of murdering a police officer in 1981, but what made his case so unusual was what happened after the crime. Days after the shooting, he turned the gun on himself and attempted suicide by shooting himself in the head. He survived, but the bullet destroyed a significant portion of his brain, leaving him with lasting cognitive impairments. For the next decade, attorneys argued that Rector wasn't mentally competent to be executed. He struggled to understand basic questions, forgot key details about his case, and at times behaved like a child. Still, the courts ruled that the execution would proceed. On January 24, 1992, Rector sat down for his final meal: steak, fried chicken, and a slice of pecan pie. But when it came time to eat the dessert, he gently pushed it aside. "I'm saving it for later," he said. That moment, simple, strange, and quietly heartbreaking, sparked outrage across the country. Many believed it was proof that Rector did not comprehend what was about to happen. Just hours later, he was executed by lethal injection. He never got to eat the pie. To this day, Ricky Ray Rector's final words are remembered not for defiance or philosophy, but for a quiet sentence that raised a nation's deepest questions about punishment, humanity, and the mind. Case 6, Robert Alton Harris. Everybody dances with the Grim Reaper. On the morning of July 5, 1978, 2 teenage boys, John Maskey and Michael Baker, were headed out to grab some burgers in San Diego, California. They never made it home. Robert Alton Harris and his younger brother flagged them down, forced their way into the car, and took them to a remote area. There, Harris shot both boys and left their bodies behind. Hours later, he used the stolen car to rob a bank, escaping with just over $2,000. He was arrested the same day. In court, the details stunned the public. The victims were just 16 years old. The crime was cold, calculated, and unprovoked. Harris was found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and armed robbery. In 1979, he was sentenced to death. Then came the delays, appeals, reversals, legal motions. For 13 years, the case dragged on, symbolizing everything critics said was broken about the American death penalty system. But on April 21, 1992, at San Quentin State Prison, the wait came to an end. Harris became the first person executed in California in 25 years. He was led into the gas chamber, a method that itself had become the center of controversy. And as he stood moments from death, he delivered a final line that sounded more like a movie script than a goodbye. "You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everybody dances with the Grim Reaper." The quote, taken from the film Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, became one of the most quoted final statements in U.S. death row history. Part poetry, part bravado, part resignation. For California, the execution of Robert Alton Harris reignited debate over capital punishment, the method of execution, and the question still unanswered decades later. How much justice does death truly deliver?